Welcome back, guys, to another episode of Highly Conflicted. And it's just me today because I have the dish from inside Trump world on the latest on the campaign trail because it's hot and it's about the debate disaster. The main takeaway is that the Trump guys know the debate was bad. You've been seeing for days these guys saying, oh, we won the debate. Trump came out and said, oh, I won the debate. But privately, and I've spoken to multiple campaign officials on this, they know they screwed up. They know Trump missed maybe the biggest opportunity he had to reset the campaign. At best, they're basically saying it was a draw, which is like really bad for Trump world when you consider that for the longest time they have been looking at the debate as the moment to like reset, which by the way would have been like the fifth reset this campaign since Kamala Harris became the Democratic presidential nominee. And at worst, they're saying it was a disaster, it was a nightmare, and they really don't know what they're going to do to cut through and blunt Harris's momentum. I think mainly they know that Harris baited him. They know that she got under his skin, and he fell for the oldest trick in the book, which is to taunt him about his rally sizes and to say that, his crowds are leaving early and that they were bored by his rallies and that they went on and they were rambling. And you could see on Trump's face, like the corners of his mouth just articulating and in the way that it does when he's really frustrated and flustered. And I think that's what was on display Tuesday night at the ABC debate. One aide texted me and was like, will tonight benefit us? No, it will not. And I think that kind of sums up where this campaign is. They're trying to expand the coalition. They know they have the base, the MAGA base, and its support, but they're really trying to reach independent voters, undecided voters, like, both campaigns always have been. And the debate did them no favors. On the other hand, if you had concerns about Harris's competency and whether she might make a good president, I think some of those fears were allayed by her performance, just because she really managed to play up against Donald Trump, and Trump came off looking really bad. So what I wanted to do is to take a bit of a step back, because his team knows it was a colossal missed opportunity on so many levels, but it's actually a bigger problem than that. You see, for weeks, the Trump campaign has not had a proper plan. Around the end of August, they decided, we'll go through the motions, we'll do our regular campaign rallies, and that'll carry him through to debate season, as they were calling it. And, they thought on the stage, given the difference between Trump and Harris, Trump would probably win. And they were looking at the Biden debate as the model. And so that's exactly kind of what happened. They were looking at the debate as the moment to cut through. They were like, yes, this is going to be the time when we can get the momentum. And then it didn't happen, right? It was, I don't know. I feel bad for the Trump team in some respects, because they were going into the debate saying that Trump had done the most prep of anyone, and that Trump had prepared particularly hard for this debate. He had done the most prep work for any of his previous debates, including the one against Biden, which his team knew was also a big deal. I think maybe part of the problem was he did the debate prep with Matt Gaetz and Tulsi Gabbard, the former congresswoman, just because she had had a good night against Harris during the Democratic primary in 2020. But Harris in 2020 is not Harris now. She's had 4 years as vice president. She's done a lot more events. She knows now how the game is played at the federal level in the White House. And you could see it really made a difference. And she also has the entire Democratic campaign apparatus behind her. She has Biden's aides. She has her own aides. She's gone through several cycles of advisors, and she's settled on a team that she likes. She's in a much more comfortable position now than she was 4 years ago. And I don't know that the Trump team quite factored that in. I think Trump's debate, how when you were a kid and you had exams coming up and you sometimes flip through your notes and you'd be like, yeah, I did my revision. It's kind of like that. When Trump does prep work for a debate, what he calls kind of policy sessions, they literally sit around and they discuss, like, oh, this is the sort of thing that could come up. How would you respond, Mr. Trump? And Trump goes, oh, I'll say that. And Tulsi's like, no, we should say this instead. And that's kind of how it is. Trump doesn't do formal debate prep. He doesn't stand there, have someone else play Harris or his opponent and simulate this in real time because he thinks he can do it himself. Trump's biggest refrain is always, I'm the best spokesperson for myself, and I'm better at this than anyone else is. And I think that is the mentality going in. And so even, for him, it might have been pretty intense debate prep. But I think what became clear on the night was Harris was way better prepared and way more agile than he was. I think based on what I can understand from Trump's team, they think Trump was thrown off from the moment, from even before they started, from the moment that Harris walked across the stage and shook his hand. He was not expecting that. He was not expecting to do any shaking of hands at the beginning. And when she crossed over the stage into his proverbial territory, Trump seemed unnerved, and his team believes that that was the moment when they thought, oh no, maybe this is where he gets thrown off a little bit. And after that, it was chaos, right? He got sidetracked on the immigration question, which is technically his favorite topic. He loves talking about immigration, how Harris is the border czar, and how she failed. And he got sidetracked ultimately on the immigration question because he was arguing with moderators over whether Haitian immigrants were eating pets. And I think that kind of that moment encapsulated how badly the night would go for him. There's actually a backstory with the Haitian immigrant supposedly eating pet story, and it's quite extraordinary. This might have been the biggest self-own for the Trump campaign this presidential cycle. The entire story about immigrants eating pets was originally pushed by the Trump campaign, and they pushed it right before the debate because they wanted to make the debate about immigration, and they wanted that to be the sticking point. They were reposting this shit. Trump was reposting AI memes of him, with a cat and a goose and running away from two kind of brown-skinned men, and they were really leaning into it. And I don't think people realize the extent to which a lot of this was planned and planted in advance. Because the whole argument that the Trump campaign is trying to make is that every state is a border state. Even if you live in Ohio, you have to grapple with the effects of illegal immigration. And this was the point they were trying to pull. And so and this was actually planned. They prepared for this. When this question came up at the debate, the original strategy was for Trump to say, well, that's just what locals are saying to us. This is what we're hearing. And then he was supposed to pivot to attacking Harris on immigration. The problem was it came up right after he had been mocked about his rally size. And having a plan is fine, but it requires your principal to actually execute it. And the trouble with Trump was he never got around to doing the pivot. He got bogged down into this fruitless back and forth with the moderator, talking about whether the story was even true. And then he said, well, I know it's true because I watched it on TV. I can tell you, folks, that was not in the plan. He was supposed to have already been pivoting to attacking Harris by then, and it never came. The pivot never came. It was just him arguing, and it made him look like crazy. It was insane. It looked wild. When have you ever seen a presidential candidate argue with a moderator about whether immigrants are eating pets? I cannot tell you the number of faceplant emojis I got from people adjacent to the Republican National Committee and the Trump campaign because they knew in real time it was bad. And they knew it was bad in real time because they started spinning reporters halfway through the debate. This is the big tell with the Trump campaign and the Trump advisors generally is if they don't respond to you immediately, or if they try and spin you really maybe too aggressively, that something is up. And I had this exchange with several people around Trump that night who were trying to say that Trump wasn't angry. And I was like, what do you mean he's not angry? He's literally yelling. And they wouldn't back down. And they were like, no, he's not angry. He's just frustrated that Harris is, failing our country. And I knew at that moment that they knew this was not the debate performance they had planned for, and this was not the debate performance they had strategized. At the end of the day, then, basically what the campaign has is a debate performance which they hoped would reset the narrative, including on immigration, based on a story they cooked up, but then failed to close. So now they're holding this sack of shit about immigrants eating pets, people thinking this guy is totally weird if it wasn't already for, Harris and Tim Walz, her running mate, saying these are weird guys. And they're wondering what to do next. And this is probably the furthest thing from where they were supposed to be at this point in the campaign, less than 60 days until the election. It's still going south, actually, for a number of reasons, because that was the debate disaster. But there are ramifications across the entirety of the campaign as well. And I'm not being flippant, but there's now a sense of what should they do now, as well as now that they haven't retaken the momentum, they have a black hole both on the messaging front, but also crucially, and this is kind of getting into our reporting from this week about the ground game, but they have a black hole there as well. And this is the problem with the ground game. In essence, there's just no two ways about it. The Trump campaign has this tiny presence on the ground. In particularly close elections, it's really important for campaigns to drive the vote. I think the number that experts kind of refer to is if it's 0.5%, 1% difference, that's when a get out the vote scheme, a field operation, as it's called in the lingo, really makes a difference. And local Republicans that we have spoken to say the formal presence of the Trump campaign, it's more comparable to a midterm cycle. Now, the Trump campaign won't release the numbers. They never release, they say we're never going to release these numbers because it's proprietary data and it doesn't matter and we don't share our internals. But I did get them to tell me that it was more than 50. Now I'm looking at that and I'm like, well, is that 51? But the reason they said more than 50 was because The Guardian obtained a spreadsheet of the Republican National Committee's 2022 midterm results. In 2022, the RNC had roughly 43 staffers in Pennsylvania, for instance, and 350 paid staffers nationally. That's just the paid staff. I'm not talking about the canvassers and the door knockers, because there are many thousands of those people that go out. But I'm looking specifically at the paid staff because those are the people that oversee the state operations, right? You have a state director, you have a regional director, you have deputy state directors, you have what are known as early voting, mail-in ballot directors. And those guys are the guys that run the ground operation, the Get Out the Vote program. The RNC's target for the 2024 cycle was 88 in Pennsylvania, for instance. The Trump campaign is telling me they have more than 50. So I'm not even confident, and the Republicans on the ground are not even confident that they even hit the RNC's targets. Meanwhile, the Harris campaign has 375 paid staffers. That's what they're working with. And that is basically just the tip of the iceberg. You see, what the Trump campaign has done is they've relied effectively and outsourced their entire ground game operation to a number of super PACs. They decided to do this for a number of reasons, mainly that the FEC, the Federal Election Commission, issued a new opinion this year that said campaigns could more closely coordinate their get out the vote efforts with outside groups, these super PACs, because the super PACs have a lot of money, they have a lot of donors who aren't capped out at donating money for a particular candidate. And so the idea is the super PACs can go do the get out the vote, and the campaigns can work on their day-to-day operations. And that's what the Trump campaign did. There is the second element, though, with the Trump campaign, which is in March, when they took over the RNC, they decided to scrap the RNC's field operation. When Chris LaSavita and James Blair effectively took over the ground game effort, They fired all the data people, they fired all the political people, and they fired all the comms people. And they said, well, you can reapply, but you got to go through this kind of loyalty test to show your loyalty to President Trump. And actually, a number of them were rehired, but it took a very long time to do that. And so, in the interim, a lot of people who really did want to reapply and stay at the RNC and were just fired just because the campaign decided to fire a lot of people for the sake of it and to kind of quote unquote clear shop, they went off into the private sector and they're no longer at the RNC. And then they decided to put in a hiring freeze and they didn't hire anyone new. And so they were months out from the presidential election. This was earlier this year, right? And they really didn't have people centrally coordinating at the RNC for a number of weeks. And then we get to the super PACs. So you've got this internal fissures inside the RNC. You're lacking, really good people or people who had institutional knowledge who left because the Trump campaign decided to clear house. And then now you're relying on these super PACs to do the actual ground game operation. And that's all well and good. Look, the Trump campaign has said, we didn't like what the RNC was doing because they were targeting the wrong demographics. They were doing kind of big swathes of kind of likely Republican voters, and they were just doing it without a lot of targeting. There is an element of truth in that. The RNC has been lazy in past cycles because, the way that field operations work and the way door knocking works, for instance, the RNC put a big premium on the number of doors knocked. And you can see this in the spreadsheets. There's a cross tab for this. And because they were trying to juice those numbers, because it looked better internally, they would hit houses in suburban areas because you just get through more houses, more doors in a particular day. Whereas in a rural area where you have, very high energy Trump supporters, they're much more spread out, right? It takes a longer time to go from house to house, from door to door. And you got to remember that the way these door knocking things work, you have a very small sliver of time during the day to door knock. You can only do it from in the mid-afternoon to the early evening, because there's no point doing it in the morning when people are rushing to go to work. There's no point doing it late at night when, they're having dinner. There's no point doing it over the weekend when they don't want to have their weekends interrupted. And so it's a very narrow sliver of window that these people have to go knock on doors and say, hey, you're a Trump supporter. We encourage you to request an early ballot. We encourage you to vote and return a vote for Donald Trump this cycle. The super PACs have only started recruiting door knockers late in the game. I'm talking recent weeks. That means that these super PACs, which are running the entire ground game operation for the Trump campaign, are only going to get one or two what we call voter contacts this cycle. And that's a real problem for them because the data has showed historically that prospective voters require multiple contacts, multiple visits, multiple words of encouragement before someone goes and returns a ballot. The Trump campaigns missed all this because they only started hiring a couple of months ago. Whereas Democrats have had these operations and plans in place for years, meaning they have had repeated contacts with all of their likely voters for years. Whereas the Trump campaign is starting now, 2 or 3 months before the election. And then there's the other issue with hiring and starting so late. It's all the good quality candidates who know what to say when they get to the door and approach a house without being too suspicious, because you're basically going up to a stranger's house and knocking on the door. Those guys are gone. They all got hired months ago by other people, by the Biden-Harris campaign. Or they just don't want to do it. I mean, what the super PACs are basically offering people right now is, here's a 2-month work contract, maybe, $30 an hour, to go knock on doors in the blazing Arizona heat or the blazing Nevada heat or in Philadelphia or in Georgia or in North Carolina, and potentially receive hostile responses from the neighbors. Maybe you get bitten by dogs. That's a very common occurrence. It's not an enticing job. And that's the problem. The ground game is non-existent, or has been for a long time. And to only be spooling up now is probably the biggest gamble that the Trump campaign has made this presidential race. That would have been fine, maybe, if Trump himself was really good at driving people to vote for him. And that has always been the rhetoric from the Trump campaign. But then when you couple that with the debate performance on Tuesday night, I'm not even sure that you have that. And that's the double whammy problem that the Trump campaign now has. Trump isn't sending people necessarily to the vote, cast a vote. And the super PACs doing the ground game aren't necessarily sending people out to cast a vote. And so you have two major avenues that the campaign had gambled on potentially not working out or being less effective than they had anticipated and modeled. In 60 days, less than 60 days from the presidential election, that is where the Trump campaign now stands. Kamala Harris has drawn level in the polls, ahead in some states, margin of error granted, and the get out the vote effort is only now spooling up. And separate to that, by the way, because of the debate, many voters might think Trump's a little too much of them for them. That Trump is a little too crazy, is a little too out there. And I think the biggest kicker for the campaign is their greatest fears have been realized or they're getting realized. The biggest concern for Trump's advisors going into the debate was that they would get angry Trump as opposed to happy Trump. That was the refrain I heard over and over again. Angry Trump is the Trump who is prone to self-sabotage and lashing out at people and kind of attacking moderators and making ad hominem attacks at his opponents. And what they really wanted was happy Trump. They wanted light on his feet, agile, could make little quips like he was with Biden. And ultimately they got furious Trump, right? They didn't even get angry Trump, they got furious Trump. I mean, he was, like I told the Trump aide, he was literally yelling. And that was probably the furthest thing from what they had wanted to see, just because it plays badly, and they know it plays badly. For the longest time, the Trump campaign knew they couldn't restrain Trump on social media. They couldn't prevent him from reposting, crazy memes or kind of memes that were AI generated or were causing problems for his legal cases. But they thought they could get him to focus on policy in a debate. And he was pretty good on that score in the debate against Biden. But Harris dangled that big red piece of meat in front of his face on the fishing line, and he was reeling it in. And Trump went for it every single time. I think the furious Trump they got, though, was also a reflection of where Trump knows his campaign is. He knows that he's not on comfortable ground. Part of the reason he was happy Trump against Biden was because he knew he was, up in the polls. He knew that Biden was flagging. He knew that, if he continued in the way that he was probably likely to win the election. And then when Biden got knocked out and ousted off the ticket, and Harris, this younger black woman, I should say, because Trump has real problems responding to women in positions of power, especially if they're minorities or if they're black. And when Trump saw that, I think it put him in a very insecure position. It wasn't just that he did potentially lackluster prep with Matt Gaetz and Tulsi Gabbard. It wasn't just that he might have been overconfident of his abilities and underestimating Harris's abilities. I think it was also that deep down inside, Trump knows, for the moment at least, he's on the back foot. And that was why he was so prone to lashing out, because he feels insecure about where his campaign is. And he feels as though what he thought was in his hands is slipping away from him. Trump keeps wanting to run the race that he wants, even though it doesn't exist anymore. He's like trying to will it into existence. He's trying to will Biden back into existence. And he's trying to will the topics that he wants to talk about into existence. But then when he gets questioned on any of that, when there's pushback on any of that, I think he struggles because he doesn't know exactly how to respond sometimes. And that's not a dig at Trump. I think many candidates in his position who thought they were coasting to victory and suddenly were knocked back into a position where they were more uncertain. I think any candidate would feel unmoored. And I think that plays a lot into where Donald Trump's psyche is as we come into the final stretch of the election. Anyway, that's basically my entire notebook. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next week.